Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe if you like this video, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. Pencils down, trade deadline day is over, and the Pittsburgh Penguins general manager Kyle Dubas certainly had a lot of work that he did leading up to and a little bit following the NHL trade deadline today. As you can see in the corner, if you're watching on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, he has two phones in that picture. That is the famed picture of Kyle Dubas from multiple years ago. Seems like he was using 3 or 4 today for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll go through all 4 of the trades that Dubas made on behalf of the Pittsburgh Penguins, including 2 that we talked about a little bit deeper earlier in the day as they happened. That's the Anthony Beauvillier trade, and that's the Luke Schenn trade. But we will also talk about Cody Glass getting shipped to the New Jersey Devils and the Penguins getting involved in a 3-way trade between the Boston Bruins, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll cover it all here on a Full Sail recap of the Pittsburgh Penguins at the 2025 NHL trade deadline. Let's kick things off with the first thing we saw today, and that was Anthony Beauvillier being traded to the Washington Capitals in exchange for a second-round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. Now, the Penguins, coming into today, did not have a second-round pick in this upcoming draft. They traded that away back in 2023 as part of the deal that landed them Erik Karlsson. So they get back into the second round, and they continue to accumulate draft picks, which ended up being a rather large theme on the day. And it's good because Anthony Beauvillier, back when he signed last offseason to a 1-year, $1.25 million contract, you said, all right, you're taking a chance on a forward that has proven that he can do it at the NHL level, but he was coming off of a rough season, being moved twice, first from Vancouver to Chicago, if I'm remembering the steps correctly, and then he went from Chicago to the Nashville Predators. This year he comes in looking to make a name for himself, looking to get back on the horse at the NHL level, and you said to yourself, if he does, this is exactly what you want, because then he could become a trade piece at the deadline. If he didn't, it was only a 1-year deal, so no harm, no foul. And the Penguins weren't really a team in position to vie for a championship at the beginning of the season anyway. So if he would have signed for 1 year and stunk up the joint, oh well, that would have been whatever it was. But Anthony Beauvillier had a surprisingly good season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was a jack of all trades, moving from the left wing to the right wing, playing with Sidney Crosby and then sometimes playing with Noel Acciari. He had 20 points in 63 games played, and at the end of the day, he was somebody that Mike Sullivan could just trust to plug and play wherever they needed on any given night. He played well enough that he fetched a second-round pick for the Penguins, and that is a tremendous return for Kyle Dubas and company for a guy that, like I mentioned, they signed to a 1-year prove-it deal. To be able to get a second out of that is just extremely good work by Kyle Dubas, and just him taking advantage of the marketplace. And you would see, as we'll get to, that he continued to do it all day long. A little bit after the Anthony Beauvillier trade, the Penguins flipped defenseman Luke Schenn to the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for a 2026 second-round pick, the second-round pick that they acquired on the day, and a 2027 fourth-round pick. Now, the fourth-round pick essentially is just them recouping what they sent to Nashville for Luke Schenn in the first place. A fourth-round pick was part of that trade going out. Now they get a fourth-round pick coming in order to send Luke Schenn to the Winnipeg Jets. And they also get a second-round pick in 2026, which is a nice little addition for a guy that literally didn't even take a practice shift with the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins now have 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 second-round picks in the 2026 NHL draft. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have watched thoroughly the top 100 prospects that are coming out in the 2026 NHL draft. But all I will say is everybody whose opinions I thoroughly trust, the Jesse Marshalls of the world, who has done a little bit of work in looking into those prospects, the Scott Wheelers of the world, those types of people are saying that the 2026 draft should, we still don't know, but should provide much more depth and much higher potential for talent than the 2025 draft. So the Penguins now being stocked up with 3 second-round picks in that draft is certainly a good place to be. And as far as Luke Schenn is concerned, he would have been a good defensive defenseman for the Penguins. He's reliable. He is a good leader. Everything that they said on Wednesday when they acquired him remains to be true. He's a physical guy that would have stood up for the Pittsburgh Penguins, kind of filling in that Vincent Desharnais role that we saw for a couple of weeks, but with a little bit of a higher upside when it comes to actually defending your own ice. But at the same time, it's just not what he wanted. Luke Schenn, according to Josh Yohe of The Athletic, wanted to go to a contending team, and that the Penguins are not. On Twitter earlier today, Josh Yohe put, quote, Luke Schenn told the Penguins that he wanted to play for a contender. The Penguins initially did want to keep him, though. So the plan was to bring him in, hope that he was amenable to staying on the Pittsburgh Penguins and being a leader for a team at the bottom of the standings. But he said, hey, I would like to play for a contender if you could swing that. And they said, you know what? We can swing that because we'll recoup what we paid for you and we'll get a second-round pick to boot. It's good asset management. Again, for Kyle Dubas, something that I've said multiple times throughout the day today. Let's get to the two trades I haven't talked about on air. First, the Cody Glass trade, the biggest surprise of the day to me, because I was expecting, as we'll talk about, other names to be gone. I was expecting names that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks to be gone. And the only one that really went was Anthony Beauvillier. Yeah, you could throw in Luke Schenn after reports came out that they could flip him and that a lot of teams had interest in him. But going back to before Wednesday's trade, the only player that was traded that we expected to be was Anthony Beauvillier. Nobody, and I mean nobody, expected Cody Glass to be traded, and yet here we are. He was traded to the New Jersey Devils along with prospect Jonathan Gruden. In exchange, the Penguins get back a third-round pick and two forward prospects, Max Graham and Chase Stillman. Now, what we know of Stillman and Graham is, Graham, first of all, is a 2024 fifth-round pick that is currently playing in the WHL for the Kelowna Rockets. He is their captain, which, again, follows a theme of what the Pittsburgh Penguins like out of their guys. First and foremost, CHL guys. Kyle Dubas loves guys from the Canadian Hockey League. He loves junior players. But secondly, they want leaders. Rutger McGroarty was the captain of Team USA. Owen Pickering was the captain of the Swift Current Broncos. Graham is the captain of the Kelowna Rockets. Tanner Howe was the captain of the Regina Pats. They value leadership in these young guys. So they get Graham, who's a 20-year-old center, and we'll see how it pans out. He's still very young. He's not a top prospect, but he is a prospect that they get and add to a growing cupboard that was barren just about 2 years ago. Chase Stillman, a little bit older, 21 years old, plays the right wing, and is in his second year of professional hockey, currently at 100 games played in the AHL level even. So you'd have to imagine that Stillman's going to report to the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, and you're going to hope that he just fits in really well with a lot of your young guns down there, your Ville Koivunens, your Vasily Ponomarevs, and you hope that he can just become part of that group that at some point, someday, is going to make that large group jump to the National Hockey League, and you're hoping that it works out similar to what we saw back in 2016. They're just adding fuel to the fire down there in Wilkes-Barre with this trade. Now, Cody Glass, he was traded to the Penguins last summer. He also came to the Penguins for basically nothing. The Penguins got Cody Glass originally last August along with a 2025 third-round pick and a 2026 sixth-round pick in exchange for Jordan Frasca, somebody who had played some games at the AHL level, but was really a guy that was bouncing between the Wheeling Nailers of the E and the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins of the A. So they were able to take Cody Glass on simply because the Nashville Predators were trying to get rid of his salary cap hit, and they took him on along with a third and a sixth, and now they flip him for another third-round pick and for two prospects that they get the opportunity to see if they can turn them into anything. This is, again, for the third time today, elite asset management by Kyle Dubas. This was a big surprise. I liked Cody Glass a lot, but whenever you look at the entirety of the situation now, where Cody Glass stood in the organization, Tommy Novak replaced him at the center ice position, ahead of him in the organizational depth chart. Phil Tomasino, because of his performance over the last couple of weeks, has jumped him in the organizational depth chart at wing. And if you look at those young guns, they're on their way next season. So if you're not planning on re-signing Cody Glass, who was going to be a free agent, you might as well trade him. And if you're going to trade him, getting a third-round pick and a couple of prospects that are 20 and 21 years old, respectively, not a bad move. The other piece to this is Jonathan Gruden. I thought Jonathan Gruden showed up for himself really well last year. I thought he impressed me. Not I thought, he did impress me last year when he was given his couple cups of coffee at the NHL level. And I thought, okay, this is a guy that could come up and maybe be an everyday fourth liner. He was good on the forecheck. He utilized his physicality. He had some offensive capabilities, which we saw at the AHL level. But this year, it just seemed like he got buried in the AHL. It seemed like he fell too far down the ladder. And with that, maybe a fresh start is needed. He could still probably turn into a decent fourth liner at the NHL level at some point, but it just wasn't working in Pittsburgh. And like I said, he just fell too far down the ladder. So he ends up being in this trade along with Cody Glass. And then there was one other move that happened, a move that still, at least as of when I started this recording, wasn't made official, but we all expect it to happen. And that is the Pittsburgh Penguins sticking their nose into a trade between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins. It was a 3-team trade that landed Brandon Carlo in Toronto. It sent a first-round pick back to Boston, and I believe it was Fraser Minton who also went to Boston, but the Pittsburgh Penguins give away a 5th-round pick in this exchange to take on a little bit of salary. They grab Connor Timmins and Connor Dewar, the Connor twins, coming to Pittsburgh to, for the most part, fill the roles and fill the spots of Cody Glass and of Luke Schenn. Now, I said when the Luke Schenn trade came out that I was excited because that means you'd give Vladislav Kolyachonok a little bit more of an opportunity. Connor Timmins comes in. He plays right side defense. He's probably going to be on the third pairing. So Kolyachonok isn't guaranteed to play the whole season, and he wasn't in the first place. But now I think you're still going to see some movement around that third pairing, whether or not that's Ryan Shea getting bounced back down whenever P.O. Joseph is healthy, or whether that's Ryan Graves getting bounced back out of the lineup in favor of Kolyachonok. It's just giving them a 7th defenseman to work with moving forward in Connor Timmins. I mean, he's a decent depth piece. 142 games of NHL experience. He's on the last year of his contract, so if it doesn't work out, you just don't qualify him, because that's the other part of this. At $1.1 million, and at his age, he's a restricted free agent. So not only are you on the last year of his contract, but you do have a little bit of team control, which I like as well. And this is the second time Kyle Dubas has traded for Connor Timmins. The first time was back in 2022 when he was the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you just had to know that if the Penguins were going to bring somebody in throughout this entire process, Kyle Dubas was going to get at least one player that played for the Sioux Greyhounds. And that player is Connor Timmins. He's a Kyle Dubas guy, similar to what we saw from Philip Karl, who was a Kyle Dubas guy in Toronto and was brought in and has been very good at the American Hockey League level. Similar with Michael Bunting, who we knew Kyle Dubas liked him in his time in Toronto. He brought him in last year as part of the trade for Jake Gensel. Now Connor Timmins is the latest in Kyle Dubas guys to be brought to the organization. Connor Dewar, another player coming over. He's a depth forward, and a decent depth forward. He's a guy that's going to fill in for the penalty killing ice time that they're going to lose by trading away Cody Glass. Glass was 3rd on the Pittsburgh Penguins among forwards in penalty kill ice time this year. So you do need somebody to fill that role. Connor Dewar is going to be that guy. And similar to Connor Timmins, he's on the last year of his contract, and he's under team control because he's going to be a restricted free agent. He's a depth center with over 200 games of NHL experience. So that is the rundown. 14 minutes. Tried to get it all in there. A lot of information that I threw at you. But the good thing is, if you want deeper thoughts on the trades involving Luke Schenn, deeper thoughts on the trade involving Anthony Beauvillier, I have a separate video on my channel. So where does that leave us? All of these moves, where does it leave the Pittsburgh Penguins? It leaves them in a position where they are completely stocked up on draft capital. Most draft picks of any team in the NHL over the next 3 years. 30 total draft picks over the next 3 years. That's a lot of ammunition for Kyle Dubas, and he doesn't have to just utilize it all at the NHL draft. He spoke about this at the press conference that's probably still going on because I had to get this out. But he spoke about this at the press conference saying we could weaponize those picks and make some trades, bring in guys that had been talked about this week, guys that have been talked about throughout the entire season, your Nick Robertsons, your Brant Clarks, your JJ Peterkas. If those guys are available again in the summer, Kyle Dubas has the ammunition to go out and get at least into those conversations. Or he could utilize those picks and just draft them and try to develop them and try to help the Pittsburgh Penguins by building the next generation through those draft picks. Or he could use them to get rid of some other things. He could use a couple of those picks to get rid of, I don't know, the Ryan Graves contract. He could use a couple of those picks to get rid of the Tristan Jarry contract. That one feels less likely, but hey, you never know. The question becomes now, and the focus becomes now, how does Kyle Dubas weaponize the mass amount of draft capital and just capital in general that he's accumulated over the last calendar year since he set this in action with the Jake Gensel trade? That's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. Now, what a lot of people are also going to talk about today is who didn't get traded. I mentioned during this episode that there were a lot of players that we all expected to get traded that didn't go. Noel Acciari was one of them. He was mentioned by Elliot Friedman on Sportsnet earlier this week on 32 Thoughts. Said, I feel like there's going to be a lot of teams that are interested in Noel Acciari. At the end of the day, Acciari doesn't go anywhere. I'm not overly surprised about this because he hasn't had a great season and he's not getting any younger. And the way that he plays is not conducive to longevity in this league past what he's already been. So it feels like he's not going to get any better from this stage on. If he does, great. That's what I think everybody wants to see if he's going to stick around in Pittsburgh, certainly. But I just don't know if there was a market enough for a guy that has struggled mightily throughout this season, has no offensive upside at this stage of his career, and is going to be a tried and true fourth liner penalty kill guy for $2 million this year and next. Matt Grzelcyk's the other name. That's the one I'm a little bit more surprised about, but at the same time, you also have to think about the fact that the Penguins were able to get the return that they probably were hoping to get for Grzelcyk for Luke Schenn. So could you have done it twice and ended up with twice as much draft capital? Yeah, you could have. But at the same time, who knows if that offer was, one, even on the table for Matt Grzelcyk, and two, what's the harm in keeping him around? You might lose him for nothing in the offseason. So what? He was a good player for the Penguins. He's been a decent player for the Penguins this year. He's been great for them on the power play. But this is not a guy that I think I would be concerned about saying, well, if you lose him for nothing, I can't believe you did. No, it's all right. If he walks, he walks. If he makes more money next year, he makes more money next year. Could you have probably gotten a second-round pick for him this year? Probably, considering what the market was. But if you look at what Kyle Dubas was able to do, one extra second-round pick, while it would be nice, I'm not going to rake him over the coals for that and make him out to be somebody who missed too many opportunities whenever you look at the opportunities he actually did take during this year's trade deadline. Then there are two big ones. Erik Karlsson, which I think as the week went on became less and less of a reality, and Rickard Rakell, one that up to the last minute, everybody was keeping their eyes peeled for, because outside of Mikko Rantanen and outside of Brad Marchand, I would argue that right now the value is higher for Rakell because the level of play is higher for Rakell. But name value, it was Rantanen, Marchand, then Rakell, all in the same boat as the biggest names available today on the trade deadline. Dubas said that he didn't get to a point where he needed to ask people to waive their full no movement clause. So that means they never got close enough for guys like Karlsson for him to approach him. And he also said that the no trade clauses, the modified no trade clauses, wouldn't have been a hindrance at this point. So Rickard Rakell doesn't end up getting traded. The argument was his value, is higher now than it's ever going to be. I agree to it to some extent because the market heated up so much that his value had to have at the very least trickled over what it's going to be this summer. But that doesn't mean that his value is not still going to be extremely high this summer. There's a lot of people that are going to say, well, you can't get nearly what you were going to get at the trade deadline. I think you can, because I think his value is still going to be sky high. He's still going to be under team control. He's still going to be on a very team-friendly contract, especially with the salary cap rising. And I don't think there's anything that he's going to do in the next 18 games that's going to tank his trade value. The guy has 29 goals this season. If he's sticking in Pittsburgh, that means he's sticking on Sidney Crosby's wing, and you'd have to imagine that he's going to at least pass the 30-goal mark for the third time in his career, and he's going to likely make a career high in both goals and points. I understand that maybe, just maybe, that value isn't going to reach the peaks that it would have reached if you traded him now. But I also think that there's a chance that that drop-off is not as drastic as everybody's making it out to seem. So a couple of players not traded that we expected to. That's interesting. It is. And obviously, it's a discussion that we can have for the remainder of the season now that we have until the end of the season to discuss about these guys before the trade market heats back up in the 2025 offseason. But at the end of the day, if he didn't get the value that he wanted for Rakell, he didn't get the value that he wanted. That should tell you one thing, that Kyle Dubas is not going to get fleeced for a Rickard Rakell trade, that Kyle Dubas isn't going to trade away good players and first-line players that are scoring 30-plus goals for less than what he thinks it's worth. And I like that about a general manager. Don't get bullied. We've seen general managers get bullied in the past. Kyle Dubas wasn't going to get bullied when it came to Rickard Rakell. So the final count to close things out, for those that haven't been keeping score at home, Luke Schenn is in and out. They bring in Luke Schenn on Wednesday. They send him out on Friday. So he is the only one in the in and out category. As far as who is out of the organization, Vincent Desharnais, Michael Bunting, Anthony Beauvillier, Cody Glass, Jonathan Gruden, the 4th-round pick in 2026, and a 5th-round pick that, as of this moment and as of this recording, I'm not sure of what year it is because it's part of that Toronto trade that wasn't finalized before I started recording this. What has come into the organization over the past couple of days? Center, Tommy Novak. Defenseman, Connor Timmins. Depth center, Connor Dewar. Prospects, Max Graham and Chase Stillman. Again, 20 and 21 years old, respectively. And then a 2nd-round pick in 2025, a 2nd-round pick in 2026, a 3rd-round pick in 2027, a 4th-round pick in 2027, and a 5th-round pick in 2028. So even if you look at it that way, the 2 picks you traded out were a 4th and a 5th. You replace those with a 4th and a 5th. You traded away Jonathan Gruden, who was never going to make the NHL roster in this organization, as well as 4 NHL players. You get back in return 2 seconds, a 3rd, 2 prospects that could turn into something, could not turn into something, 2 guys that can help your depth right now, and a center that is immediately going to be a 3rd-line center and could, as early as next season, take up the mantle of 2nd-line center, allowing Evgeny Malkin to bump over to the wing. All in a good day's work for Kyle Dubas. All in all, I would give him a B+. The only reason I give him anything under an A is because I just want to know. I want to know what was out there for guys like Matt Grzelcyk, what you could have got for guys like Matt Grzelcyk or guys like Rickard Rakell. Because if you pull those trades off, you're looking at a much bigger intake of assets here. And maybe you're looking at a player like a JJ Peterka. I don't know where that was, but I had my heart set on the kid ever since Monday, when Elliot Friedman said that he has Pittsburgh written all over him. But alas, they didn't end up getting Peterka. He ended up not going anywhere. He's still on the Buffalo Sabres, so maybe that's something we can revisit in the summer. But that's going to do it for this trade deadline edition of the Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, if you like this video, like, share, and subscribe to us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg for daily Pittsburgh Penguins content, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.